a Cartoon Network fan in the early 2000s and you wanted to play a video game adaptation, Powerpuff Girls was pretty much your only choice. 7 of the first 11 games were dedicated to fighting crime and the forces of evil. Your other 3 options were Dexter's Lab. So yeah, not a lot of variety going on in Cartoon Network's early days. It's really not that surprising though. Powerpuff Girls was a license to print money at the time, and it ended up being the first show Cartoon Network sent to the big screen. In fact, I'd almost argue that even to this day, Powerpuff Girls is the biggest franchise ever launched by Cartoon Network. 6 seasons of the original show, a movie, an anime series, 10th anniversary special, a 2014 CGI special, 3 seasons of a reboot series, and a live action show that keeps trying to claw its way out of development hell. The Powerpuff Girls have been a mainstay in pop culture since the 90s. Unfortunately, when it comes to the game side of things, the quality has been spectacularly low for the most part. There have been some okay at best games and experimentation with some pretty interesting genres, but most of the games have been embarrassingly bad. So jump in and join me on this ride through Cartoon Network video game history as I look at all 7 of the Powerpuff Girls' criminally bad video games. The Powerpuff Girls' Bad Mojo Jojo for the Game Boy Color was the first in a trio of games with Paint the Townsville Green and Battle Him, designed to be something similar to how the 2 different versions of Pokemon games work. Each of the games follow a different girl, with this one focusing on Blossom's adventures. Bad Mojo Jojo, along with the 2 other games in the trio, were developed by Scenario Interactive, and from looking at the reviews, I'm expecting this game to suck hard. It received a 5 out of 10 from IGN, which isn't terrible, but it also received a 3.2 out of 10 from GameSpot, so I don't exactly have faith in this game. However, I'm not just going to take their word for it, so I'm going to jump in and see what the Powerpuff Girls video game debut is all about. The first thing that caught my eye on the menu is that there are trading cards and secret codes in this game. Both of these aspects play into the connected version thing that they have going on, with some trading cards and secret codes only able to be found exclusively in a particular version. The secret codes unlock a number of different things like secret levels, trading cards, the ability to play as different characters such as Bubbles, the Mayor of Townsville, and Rowdy Rough Boy Butch, as well as cheat codes for unlimited flying and lives. From what I could gather, some of these codes were broadcast on Cartoon Network or could be obtained at places like Best Buy. It's actually kinda surreal to fly around levels as the Mayor of Townsville, although it's extremely disappointing that every character not only controls exactly the same, but they all have the same special attack. But now onto the actual game. The story of Bad Mojo Jojo is centered around the titular character once again causing mayhem in Townsville, and for some unknown reason it's up to Blossom to stop him by herself. There's no explanation for where Buttercup and Bubbles are, so I'm going to assume that all 3 of these linked games are meant to take place at the same time. In the first level, Mojo Jojo is broken into Professor Utonium's lab to try and create weapons. My first impression upon being dropped into the game is that the graphics kinda suck, especially after playing Robot Rampage, which looks amazing in comparison. The environments just seem bland and uninspiring, and it turned me off from the start. You're also hit right away with some very bad controls. Movement is incredibly floaty, both when walking and flying, which can be performed by holding the up button, but can only be used for a limited time before your meter depletes, while A is your punch button, and B shoots your special projectile attack, which freezes enemies. For some reason, the developers decided it would be a good idea to have a cooldown time after you've used the punch, something that makes the combat feel terrible. When watching the show, the girls are nimble and quick, but the combat here makes Blossom feel stiff and robotic, and it honestly feels like she's not a very good fighter. As a result of this cooldown time between punches, combat consists of you gliding back and forth a couple of times while throwing punches, as every enemy annoyingly takes 2 hits to kill. Each stage is littered with a varying amount of collectibles for you to find, as well as trading cards, which gives you something else to be occupied with rather than just the mundane combat. Now the first enemy I came across confused me. What is this? A mummy? I guess it kind of looks like a jail thug in prison clothing. But then bam! A fucking guy with a gun comes out of nowhere! Shit is starting to get serious now. The rest of the enemies are even more confusing. Why is there a flying jellyfish? Seriously, what is up with these enemies? Why are there flying demon creatures? My memory might be bad, but I really don't remember these enemies playing any part in the Powerpuff Girls. The flying jellyfish and demons are also incredibly annoying to kill, as they shoot extremely accurate projectiles while you have to combine the awful combat with the awful floaty flying to try and bring them down. To power your special attack, you pick up vials of Chemical X around levels. Blossom's special attack is Ice Breath. However, as I mentioned, every character's special attack is some sort of freeze power, which is lame. Freezing enemies allows you to get in one free hit. However, this is basically pointless as you can get in a free hit 99% of the time without needing to freeze them. You're better off saving the power for the end of level boss battles. The limited flying gets old quickly. It also doesn't help that pretty much every 5 steps you take you run into a collectible, resulting in the top portion of the screen being blocked to update your collectible total. This results in you being unable to tell how much is left in your meter, and if you get a collectible while in one of the levels set in the sky, you better hope you're not hovering over a bottomless pit. Speaking of dying, once you lose a life you lose all the collectibles you had and must start collecting all over again. This is incredibly dumb, as at very seldom moments there are checkpoints, so you often have to get hundreds of collectibles all over again. You'll come across random civilians in need of saving throughout levels, which is particularly weird when the first level is set inside your own house. Why are there civilians in here? When you reach the end of the first level, you are faced with a boss battle against Mojo Jojo, which is okay. It's kind of repetitive and easy, but by this game's standards it's easily the best thing that's happened so far. You'll have other battles with classic villains like Princess Morbucks and Roach Coach, but for the most part you just battle against Mojo Jojo in basically the exact same fight. After the game's introductory level, you are smacked in the face with a gigantic increase in collectibles. The second level has 171 collectibles to find, which is about 100 more than the first level. What I also found out the more I played is that the game actually becomes much easier and more enjoyable if you just ignore the collectibles and fly right by the enemies, because more often than not trying to get collectibles and engaging with enemies just results in you unnecessarily losing health. There's no real reason compelling you to fight enemies or grab collectibles outside of raising your completion percentage for the level, as you don't get upgrades or any tangible use for collectibles. Honestly, who has the patience and willpower to try and collect almost 200 collectibles, knowing that in an instant you could die and have to start from scratch? Because of this, the game basically ends up consisting of just running through levels and finding the area where the boss is. Later levels introduce more platforming elements, but they aren't fun, mainly because of the limited flying. The platforming often involves you just flying off into the abyss and hoping a platform is near you. The flying being so floaty and imprecise also becomes a headache for things such as the Mojo Jojo boss battles. Trying to dodge the blades of the helicopter, which damages you, is way harder than it should be, all thanks to you being barely able to control Blossom competently with the D-pad. The game also from time to time throws random required objectives at you. For example, in the subway level I needed to rescue the mayor, something that was explained in the cutscene before the level started. I located the area where clearly the mayor was supposed to be, but it was empty. I then spent the next 15 minutes flying around the level until I randomly found the maintenance key. Why did I need this key? The mayor wasn't in a maintenance room that needed a key. I was literally standing in that room fine before I grabbed the key. It just makes no sense whatsoever why they forced this arbitrary task onto me. On completion of the final level you were given a password, which I assumed would be used in the other games. This turned out to be true, as upon further inspection I found out that it unlocks the Utonium Chateau level in Paint the Townsville Green and Battle Him. While on the subject of secret codes, there are 2 secret levels that can be unlocked, Pokeoak School and Townsville Art Museum. These 2 levels open up a short news story that focuses on the Rowdy Rough Boys causing trouble, and after beating both secret levels, a 3rd secret level opens up called Townsville Skies, where the final boss battle takes place. The Rowdy Rough Boys could have provided for some great diversity in the boss battles, however I ended up finding an exploit that just completely ruins them. You see, if you hit them once, it's game over. By the time they recover from one hit, you're able to hit them again with another attack before they even have the chance to move out of the way or fire off an attack of their own, making the boss battles so easy. I also had one of the Rowdy Rough Boys fly off in one of the fights and literally disappear completely, which was very bizarre. I guess he didn't want to fight me? The secret levels do add an element of variety as well as adding length to what is a short game, however I'm not sure that's a good thing as the gameplay is so dull and repetitive. There's no nice way to say it. The Powerpuff Girls Bad Mojo Jojo is just a bad game. Nothing about this game is fun. The controls, combat, flying, platforming and collectibles all flat out suck, and the one aspect that could have been redeeming, the boss battles, just becomes repetitive, too easy to exploit, and actually one of the easiest parts of the game. To me, this just seems like a shameless attempt to exploit kids and fans of the Powerpuff Girls. Why did they think it was necessary to split the Powerpuff Girls into 3 separate games? Without spoiling my future reviews of Paint the Townsville Green and Battle Him, they are essentially identical games with almost identical flaws. Each game's length is like 2 hours long, which combined together would have at least made a 6-hour game. Instead of going with 3 different campaigns in one game, they decided to greedily split them up under the guise of some dumb trading card gimmick. I guarantee you there's not a single kid out there that gave a fuck about the trading cards in these games. In summary, I wouldn't even recommend you playing this even if you're a die-hard Powerpuff Girls fan. It's that bad. As we continue going through Cartoon Network's video game history, we come to the second game in a trio of Powerpuff Girl games, Paint the Townsville Green. Paint the Townsville Green was released on November 28, 2000, just 2 weeks after Bad Mojo Jojo was released. The whole release schedule and basically everything surrounding these games makes absolutely no sense, and I honestly can't come up with a reason for why this is a trio of games other than a poor attempt at a cash grab. It appears nobody even bothered to review this game, as there isn't a single review of it on the internet. However, based on the quality of Bad Mojo Jojo, I'm sure this will be garbage too. The major difference between this game and Bad Mojo Jojo is that this game has you take control of Buttercup, while the story focuses on the Gangrene Gang causing trouble in Townsville. While technically you are a different character, Buttercup controls identically to Blossom, retaining the slow and slippery movement, as well as having an identical projectile attack. Additionally, all of the enemies are the same, while most of the locations are reused from the first game. These locations are slightly altered, however they're essentially the same. Anyone starting to notice a pattern here? Admittedly, I did enjoy the levels here more than Bad Mojo Jojo's. Things such as fighting on the train in the subway are much more interesting than anything that was previously thrown at me. Playing this game is so fatiguing. Even after taking some time between playing this and Bad Mojo Jojo, it still felt like I was just replaying all the same stuff. Other than the Gangrene Gang being present, nothing new is really thrown at you, which makes it tough to stay motivated and slog through the game. It really feels like these games should have been combined to make one bigger game. Perhaps BAM forced Scenario to split them up to try and cash in on what Pokemon had done so effectively. The end of each level has you facing off against a different member of the Gangrene Gang, which was a welcome addition as it made every boss battle unique, instead of facing Mojo Jojo in the same battle multiple times. There's also one instance where you face off against Fuzzy Lumpkins. Unfortunately, it appears to be poorly programmed, as there were several times where your freeze power will flat out not work on him for no rhyme or reason. Unfortunately, these boss battles still suffer from the problem of being easy and unenjoyable. You still find way too many vials of Chemical X around levels, resulting in you having a stockpile of 20 when it comes to the boss battle. This contributes to the boringness of fights significantly. Arguably the most grating case of just reusing assets from the previous game is the soundtrack. The soundtrack is exactly the same. There's like one song in all 3 of these games and it's now burned into my brain. It also seemed like the game went by so much more quickly than the first because I already had experience playing it, which I'm kinda happy about. The less time I have to spend with these games, the better. Just like the first game, there are 5 levels with 2 secret levels unlocked by codes, and a final secret level that unlocks once you have beaten everything else. You just take on the Rowdy Rough Boys again, which is completely underwhelming. There are also secret codes that unlock other playable characters such as the Mayor, Boomer, Brick, Bubbles, and Blossom, who is incorrectly called Buttercup on the activation screen. Why weren't these 3 games just one title? Or alternatively, if they wanted to be like Pokemon, why didn't they release them all on the same day with the exact same campaign, just with a different girl playable? Instead, they technically released 3 unique games, but they're basically the same. They all suck, and the fact that I have to review all 3 because they're technically different games is my worst nightmare. Overall, I'd say Paint the Townsville Green is slightly better than Bad Mojo Jojo, but it's still a terrible game. Battle Hymn was released on February 27, 2001, a considerable amount of time after the first 2 games. As with Paint the Townsville Green, not a single review exists for this game, and I really don't blame review outlets for not touching this. So Battle Hymn is the final game in the trio, and focuses on Bubbles fighting him. This was the last straw for me. Upon starting the game, I was actually very optimistic. I immediately found out that Bubbles controls differently in this game. She's much quicker and nimble than Blossom or Buttercup, but unfortunately the slippery controls are still present. The game also suffers heavily from a problem present in the first 2. When traversing high up areas and levels, you never know whether you can drop down safely or if you're killing yourself in a bottomless pit. This is extremely frustrating as you have to go into some of these pits to get key items. From what I played, this game has the worst level design of the trio, and it also brings back my favourite mechanic of making you randomly collect a key item without telling you that you need it. Also, having to play through the same level for the 3rd time is in no way enjoyable. It also felt like they tried to drag out levels in this game to make it longer than the previous 2. The boss battles are also as shitty as ever. The second level's boss battle with the Boogeyman was so bad it snapped something inside of me, and I could just no longer continue on. The hit detection in this boss battle is fucking unacceptable, and I've honestly never seen something as bad as this. This game is fundamentally broken. Just look, I'm literally standing on him and my kicks are going right into him, so why the fuck is he not taking damage? Eventually I slogged my way through the worst boss battle I have ever played, and decided I was done for good. All I can say is this game is disgracefully bad, and despite only playing 2 levels, it is by far the worst game I have ever played in my entire life. I'm so glad that I can now move on with different games after playing this shit show. This trio of games is a disgrace to the Powerpuff Girls series. As we continue to look at the long lineage of Cartoon Network games, we come to the home console debut. The Powerpuff Girls Chemical Extraction was the very first Cartoon Network game to be released on home console, being released on both the PlayStation 1 and the Nintendo 64. For this review I played the Nintendo 64 version, however from what I can tell there's no significant difference in content between the two versions. Chemical Extraction is the 4th Powerpuff Girls game to be released, but technically it's the second as the first 3 games are essentially exactly the same. It was developed by Viz Entertainment and Asylum Entertainment, and was released in North America on October 14, 2001 for the Nintendo 64, and November 8 for the PlayStation 1. The reviews are not so good. On Metacritic there are 2 scores of 7 from GameZone and PSX Nation, but the other 4 reviews are nothing higher than a 3, receiving a 2 from IGN and a 1.5 from Game Informer. Similarly, the Nintendo 64 version received a terribly low 1.5 out of 5 from Nintendo Power. These scores are alarmingly low, but could a Powerpuff Girls fighter really be that bad? The Powerpuff Girls Chemical Extraction is a 3D fighting game, which would be a perfect genre for an adaptation of the show considering much of it consists of fighting. Upon booting the game up you have 2 modes to choose from, Story or Simulator mode. It's a given what Story mode is, but Simulator mode is just some convoluted name given to what would normally be called Exhibition or Quick Fight, which allows you to fight AI or a friend. I'm really not sure why they thought Simulator mode was a good name. Only seconds after selecting Story mode you are greeted with one of the dumbest stories ever. The Powerpuff Girls were baking a pie and decided for some reason to use Chemical X. They leave it on the ledge to cool, but oh no, it gets stolen by the villains and now they're superpowered by Chemical X. You're given 3 different campaigns to choose from, 1 for each of the girls. Once you've chosen which girl you'll be playing as, you then come to a Street Fighter-esque around the world stage select screen, with various locations from around Townsville present. After I selected the first stage, it was clear I had made a mistake. This is the world's most simplistic fighting game, even for something that is supposed to be aimed at kids. You basically have 2 options in each fight, either spam your melee attack, or alternatively pick up various pieces of furniture and fling it at your opponent. I can sort of understand the simplicity of this, as this is definitely intended to be played by children. However, the real problem is that there's no need to even think. You just smash the button to kick them, and you'll end up beating them 99% of the time. You never need to dodge or block, just simply smash one button while staring at your watch. Fights are best 2 out of 3, but it's rare that you'll ever see that 3rd round and you certainly won't ever be losing. There's also some mechanic where if you collect 3 vials of Chemical X, you get a super one-shot kill move. However, I literally never bothered with it because I was winning so easily, and I didn't even bother to stop my opponents from getting it because it rarely ever made a difference in the outcome of the match. A few of the levels have environmental hazards to help spice things up, but for the most part they're just small, flat plains that are identical to each other. You go through a few opponents like Billy from the Gangrene Gang, Fuzzy Lumpkins and Mojo Jojo, but it's nowhere near enough. I beat Blossom's campaign in around 6 minutes. 6! On to the next one I guess. Perhaps there will be different levels and different enemies? Nope. It's literally the exact same fucking thing! But what the heck. It took me 6 minutes to beat the campaign, so let's do the other 2 and see if anything special happens.
A few moments later.
After completing all 3 campaigns in quick succession, I unlocked a special level where I could battle him. This fight was laughably easy like everything else, and once I'd beaten him, that was it. Nothing else for me to do except play simulator mode. I timed how long it took me to beat the game to 100%, and I clocked in at 25 minutes. 25 fucking minutes. Most Flash games on Newgrounds last longer than that. Imagine being a parent, buying this for your child who loves Powerpuff Girls, and keep in mind Nintendo 64 games cost an arm and a leg back then, just for little Billy to beat the game in half an hour. I have no fucking idea how not 1 but 2 publications gave this a 7 out of 10. I usually hate the whole duh video games reviewers are paid off, but who the fuck could think this is a 7? What's even worse is that of the reviews I read, not one mentioned how ridiculously short the game is. In fact, the IGN review actually made it seem like it was a slog to get through. Yeah, it must have been hard having to play it for an entire 30 minutes. Maybe I was missing a difficulty setting or something, but if I did, it wasn't obviously present, and if there was one, the game clearly comes to default on the easiest setting. The Powerpuff Girls chemical extraction is a bad game. It's not a glitchy broken mess, and I guess it plays okay, but it's 30 minutes long. All you need to do is smash a single button and you'll beat the entire thing in the time it takes some people to eat dinner. Maybe the simulator mode would be fun with some friends, but the gameplay devolves into just hitting a single button, so you might have as much fun just slapping each other in the face. It's not the worst Cartoon Network game so far, because like I said, it's not broken, and it's not as dreadful as those earlier Powerpuff games. However, it's still awful and still continues a trend of terrible Powerpuff Girl games. Today we come to the Powerpuff Girls Mojo, Jojo, a Go-Go, the first ever Powerpuff Girls game on the Game Boy Advance, and the second Cartoon Network game overall on the handheld. The game was released on November 27, 2001. At least I think it was. Everywhere that has a release date for this game just says November 2001, but the little summary thing that Google provides says the 27th, so I'm going to trust Google on this. As has been the norm for Cartoon Network games in the early 2000s, Mojo Jojo a Go-Go was developed by Sonari Interactive and published by BAM Entertainment. Sonari are the same people who made the shitty Game Boy Color Powerpuff games, so I'm very cautious. However, the game sits at a not too terrible 60 on Metacritic, which makes it the highest rated Powerpuff Girls game on Metacritic by a wide margin. However, some Powerpuff Girl games don't have enough reviews to actually get a Metacritic score, so gotta keep that in mind. The majority of the reviews lead to dead links, but the publications I trust seem to all be around the 60 mark. IGN gave the game a 65, while GameSpot gave it a 63 and Game Informer a 60. The lowest of the respective reviewers, G4, gave it a 40. Similarly, Game Rankings have the game at a 62.62%, which puts it as the second highest rated Powerpuff game. Sonari have a poor track record, but critics seem to think the game is okay, so let's jump in and find out for ourselves. The Powerpuff Girls Mojo Jojo a Go-Go is an on-rails shoot-'em-up, which is an interesting genre choice for a game like this. I mentioned in my Robot Rampage review that I liked the idea of taking these different genres and inserting Cartoon Network characters into them, rather than making a typical generic platformer, which seems to be plan A for most developers when they get a Cartoon Network license or an animated license in general. However, shoot-'em-up games tend to skew towards the high end of the difficulty scale. The story of the game is pretty basic. Mojo Jojo has created an army of robots, or Mobots as he likes to call them, and has stolen Chemical X. Before each level you get a little cutscene, which look nice. I guess cutscene is the wrong word. Slideshow is probably more appropriate. It's up to you to fight through 6 stages to put an end to Mojo's rampage. Upon starting the game you're controlling Blossom, but you have the ability to toggle through all 3 girls. The girls have a projectile and melee attack, and can also pick up various items throughout the stages and use them as weapons. When one girl dies, you can keep going with the other 2 girls. Essentially, the 3 girls act as your 3 lives for each level. You also have an astronomical number of jewels to collect in each stage. Initially I thought this was your main objective, as the number of jewels needed was displayed so prominently. However, upon completing the first level it turned out that it wasn't necessary, which was a huge relief. Enemies drop jewels when defeated, and the first level requires you to grab 180 of them. This is insane. The levels get longer as you progress, but even in those levels I don't think I ever came close to getting 180 jewels. It also doesn't seem like collecting all the jewels does anything. It actually feels like they function the same as the collectibles in Sonari's other Powerpuff games, which were similarly useless. Going back to the gameplay, this game is straight up a bullet hell shmup. You can pick up various power-ups throughout the level to increase your attack power and alter the type of shot your projectile attack does. You come across one of these every few seconds, which is necessary because trying to play without any power-ups is a disaster. Bullet hell games are generally pretty hard, but for someone who is familiar with this genre, this is a pretty freaking tough game. The difficulty is mainly caused by how stupidly long the levels are. Some of the levels in this take around 10 minutes to complete, which is a lifetime for a level in this genre. To make matters worse, it appears Sonari were trying to artificially lengthen the game. Many levels just recycle identical enemy patterns multiple times, which is tedious as hell. They were so lazy that they basically just copy and pasted stuff to extend the game's lifetime. These long levels wear you down over the course of it, and you eventually fail due to a slow accumulation of damage. There are not nearly enough health pickups for how long these levels are. You'd be lucky to find 3 health pickups in most levels. It's just such a weird decision to make a game like this when the target audience is no doubt young children. Good luck to any child who tried to beat this game back in the day. One of the better aspects of this game is that there's a great amount of variety in the enemies. Every new stage introduces 1 or 2 brand new enemies, which helps keep things a little fresh and keeps you on your toes. The best part of the game, however, is the end of level boss battles. After fighting your way through each level, you encounter Mojo Jojo and face off in a battle. Each of these battles are unique and offer a fun challenge, requiring the player to analyse the movement and attack patterns. These are so much fun compared to the meat of this game, and it's a shame it's such a slog to get to them. The final level sees Mojo escape into space and the girls follow suit. This level is so much more tedious than anything else the game throws at you, and it left me begging the game to just end already. For starters, the final level is significantly longer than any of the other levels, making it a pain in the ass to get through. While the game has had the screen scroll vertically or horizontally up to this point, this level for the most part scrolls diagonally, which makes fighting and dodging enemies a million times harder. It also makes it so much easier to miss power-ups, and if you don't have a power-up equipped at all times in this level, you're as good as dead. To top it all off, they introduce the worst enemy of the game, a robot that spins around and fires off bullets. One of these enemies on their own isn't too bad, but they send 2 or 3 towards you at a time, which makes it impossible to not take at least one hit. The invincibility frames you get when you hit are so short in this game, that in this level you basically get trapped in a cycle of taking damage until these enemies fly off the screen. You basically need to grab every single health pickup and extra life throughout this level if you want to survive. Eventually I made it through the level and defeated Mojo's huge robot, which signalled the end of the game. It took me about 3 hours to complete all 6 levels, but without the artificial lengthening of levels, it feels like it should have only taken around 2 hours. Sonari had a cool idea for a game here. A bullet hell shoot 'em up aimed at kids could be awesome, and a great introduction to the genre. Unfortunately, kids and even semi-experienced shmup players will find themselves thrown into the deep end here. I really can't imagine the target audience having too much fun with this game. The most redeeming quality, the boss battles, is such a small portion of the game, and getting to them is just far too frustrating. I'd hesitate to recommend this game to Powerpuff Girls fans, because it really isn't a great game. However, maybe hardcore shmup fans would get a kick out of it. I'm talking pretty negatively about it, but this is by far the best Powerpuff Girl game I've played on Cartoon Network video game history so far. Sure, that's not really saying much considering the Sonari trio and chemical extraction are fucking horrendous, but at least they've improved here. It's far less of a mess than their previous attempts, but whether they could have kept improving we'll never know, as this was their last Cartoon Network game they ever developed. They went on to work on Driver 2 for GBA and Thunder Alley, which I'm sure were amazing, and then subsequently started developing mobile games. Honestly, Sonari weren't any good, so it's kind of a relief that I won't have to play any more of their games. Overall though, it's easily the second best game behind Robot Rampage that I've played so far from the Cartoon Network series. But considering the quality of the other games so far, it really isn't a huge achievement. This installment is titled Him and Seek, and was released on October 29, 2002, the same day as Dexter's Laboratory Chess Challenge, which I mentioned in my last review. As usual, the game was published by BAM. However, this game was developed by Vicarious Visions. Vicarious Visions are a legit developer, who had a pretty extensive pedigree before they got their hands on the Powerpuff Girls, and they've gone on to develop about a gajillion games since. This is the first time a Cartoon Network game has been entrusted with a seriously reputable developer, so I'm optimistic. This could be the first time we get a good Cartoon Network game since Robot Rampage. According to Game Rankings, this is the best Powerpuff Girls console game, as it sits on a pretty healthy 69%. EA GB Advance gave the game a 3 out of 5, Nintendo Power a 3.6 out of 5, and IGN a 7.5 out of 10. That's 3 pretty great reviews, so I'm optimistic for once as I head into this game. So, when I looked up what kind of game this was before playing, the Powerpuff Girls wiki described this as an RPG. A Powerpuff Girls RPG sounds awesome, but this couldn't be further from the truth. There's nothing even remotely present in this game that makes it close to being an RPG, so whoever wrote that is an idiot. What this game essentially is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. The story for this game is barely present. Miss Keene sends all the kids of Pokeoaks out on a scavenger hunt. That's basically the full extent of the story. Eventually on their travels to collect everything they run into bad guys, but it feels weird that the central story isn't about a villain, at least initially, but I'll come back to that later. The combat is very straightforward, with B button being your attack button. You also have the ability to shoot projectiles and can use a special super move when you collect enough power-ups. However, it's never really necessary to use anything but your melee attack. There's no nuance to the combat, which means each enemy encounter is no more than a minor annoyance. Outside of the opening stage, you play as all 3 of the girls and are able to toggle through each of them. Maybe it's a consequence of being aimed at kids, but this game is laughably easy. If the combat being incredibly straightforward wasn't enough, you also receive no punishment for dying. Seriously, you might as well not even have health, as you aren't even sent back to a checkpoint or anything. You basically respawn right where you were. Just because it is a kids game doesn't mean you have to make the game have no challenge whatsoever. Because you're on a scavenger hunt, Him and Seek basically becomes Fetch Quests the video game. And it's not like it takes much effort to find the majority of these items, as most of the time you'll run across them accidentally. The only time I struggled to find something was the very last item out of 26. The best part, as has been the case for most Cartoon Network games so far, is the boss battles. You'll encounter mostly all of the classic villains from the show, and each battle is unique and much better than the standard gameplay. Vicarious Visions clearly put a lot of thought into these, with the girls needing to attack various weaknesses to do damage. Alternatively, some of the boss battles involve surprisingly fun minigames. Battling the Gangrene Gang involves you playing pinball, while Oogie Boogie's boss fight is done in the style of a rhythm game, similar to Dance Dance Revolution. At one point you play as Mojo Jojo as he escapes from prison, and the game turns into a version of Frogger, which again is a fun little change of pace. All of these minigames can be accessed from the main menu once you've played them in the main story. The quality of the game takes a major hit once you have to head to Him's lair for an item. This level is absolutely terrible. Here the level scrolls, something that isn't done anywhere else in the game, and you have to find the correct portals to advance. Doing this becomes incredibly tedious and grinds the pace of the gameplay to a halt, which is jarring compared to how the rest of the game is played. I also found I was able to glitch through walls instead of being crushed by them if I held up or right on the directional pad, which completely defeats the purpose of scrolling in this level. Once you get all of the items for the scavenger hunt, it turns out that Him actually altered the list of items that Miss Keen handed out, which explains why she's making us go collect things from villains. Him's master plan was to rile up all the villains so he could reunite the Beat-Alls and they could try and take out the Powerpuff Girls together. Initially I thought this little plot twist meant there was a bunch of game left, however it just immediately jumps into a Mega Man style boss rush, which signals the end of the game. This game being called Him and Seek feels kinda weird, considering Him isn't even relevant until the last 15 minutes. It almost feels like Vicarious Visions made a scavenger hunt Powerpuff game, then thought it would be too hard to market so slapped Him's name on the box. The most annoying thing, and what left a very sour taste in my mouth, was that the game froze during the boss rush. This game is literally 90 minutes to 2 hours long, so I hadn't bothered to save and there was no prompting to save or auto-saving, so I lost all my progress. Having a game crash like this is infuriating, but I guess it teaches me a lesson to save often. I did YouTube a long play of the game and saw that I was literally 30 seconds away from beating it, as I was in the middle of battling Mojo and just about to take on Him. The ending is also just a dinky little cutscene, so I really didn't miss out on much. The Powerpuff Girls Him and Seek is an okay game. It doesn't fall into the category of being broken or the category of being just a flat out terrible game like many other entries so far. However, I can't bring myself to call it good. There are some good elements present, such as the boss battles and mini-games. However, the fetch quest gameplay is pretty boring, and if the game was any longer than 2 hours, it would have been an even bigger chore to play through. I think the game definitely would have benefited from being more about the villains and less about scavenger hunting. Having said that, Vicarious Visions have probably made the second, or maybe even the best Cartoon Network game so far. Today we come to an important milestone in Cartoon Network's video game history. We have arrived at not only Cartoon Network's debut on the PlayStation 2 and GameCube with the Powerpuff Girls Relish Rampage, but this also marks the very last time either Dexter's Lab or the Powerpuff Girls received a proper standalone video game. As I mentioned, the Powerpuff Girls Relish Rampage was the first time a Cartoon Network franchise had graced the PS2, the most popular gaming console of all time, as well as the GameCube. It was released on November 24, 2002 for the PS2, while it came to the GameCube on December 13 of the following year with additional content. Both versions were developed by Viz Entertainment, who had previously made Chemical Extraction. Chemical Extraction was a disaster, so there's some alarm bells here. As usual, it was published by BAM Entertainment, while also being distributed by Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment. Looking at Metacritic, the game has a disappointing average of 46, but I guess it's a little better than what their last game scored. The highest score it received here was a 7 out of 10 from Play Magazine. Unfortunately, every other review was 5 and under, with IGN giving it a paltry 3.8. Looking at game rankings isn't too much better either, as it sits on a 47.44%, being panned by almost all critics. However, the GameCube version is slightly higher on 58%, but keep in mind this is only an average of 2 reviews. From what I can tell, it seems like the Powerpuff Girls are going to go out with a whimper instead of a bang. Relish Rampage is similar to Mojo, Jojo, A-Go-Go and Him and Seek in that you control all 3 girls at the same time and can toggle through them. However, the difference here is that there's really no point to it. In those previous games, cycling through the girls meant you could use different powers and each girl had their own health bar. In Relish Rampage, all of their powers are basically shared and you only have one health bar, so it renders switching between the girls pointless. It's actually pretty much a 3D version of Him and Seek. You can fly all over Townsville and see all its different areas, just in 3D this time. I found that the graphics left a little to be desired though. I did like the look of the characters, but the city just feels so bland and it all kind of runs together. The cutscenes are also terrible. They're done more in the style of the in-game graphics than how the show looks, which I found strange. It makes everything look off and it's actually pretty distracting while you're watching them. If they had gone for 2D cutscenes and tried to be more like the actual show, I think it would have been a much better design choice. What the developers should be commended for is getting the entire voice cast for the game. Everybody from the girls to the professor to the mayor and Miss Ballum have their iconic voice, and the performance is just superb.
Ballot boxes, but you'd better hurry, girls, or we'll miss the deadline for getting the votes to the counting office.
We won't let you down, Mayor.
It's nice to see that they went all out with the voices and included them for every part of the game, because it would have been incredibly easy to only voice the cutscenes or just rip soundbites from the show. The story of the game sees Mojo Jojo initially trying to run for mayor, which accidentally results in a race of alien pickles invading and trying to take over Earth. Each level of the game is presented like another episode of the show, which makes it feel like you're playing a multi-part episode. The humour the story brings is great, and it's actually one of the better aspects of Relish Rampage. So what's the actual gameplay like? Well, it's pretty standard fare for a Powerpuff Girls game at this point. You've got your basic kick and punch button, a button that lets you use your ranged eye lasers, and then you have special moves that can be performed when you collect vials of Chemical X. All of this should sound familiar because it's how every single one of the 9 games that have come before it played. If my description sounded familiar, then my complaints are definitely going to sound familiar too. The combat is just so basic and there's absolutely no depth to it. Here you have a lock-on mechanic to compensate for being in 3D, and each fight pretty much boils down to you locking on and then mashing the kick and punch button. Every now and then with different enemies you might want to throw in a ranged attack or two, or maybe a special attack, but for the most part you're just mashing one button. The targeting system can also be a huge pain in the ass when you have more than one enemy in the vicinity. There are also only a few types of missions you're given in this game. You're either fighting against someone or something, racing against the clock to collect certain items, or doing an escort mission. This gets so repetitive, even just one level into the game. I must say though, I did get a strong The Simpsons hit and run vibe from this game. For starters, they're both animated series who received a game where they're in an open world version of the town in the show. Secondly, the types of missions used in Hit and Run are actually pretty similar to what's on offer in Relish Rampage. Heck, they even both feature an alien invasion as part of the story. You'd be excused for thinking these games share the same developer. As much as I have criticised the game so far, I think this is the game where you probably feel most like one of the Powerpuff Girls while playing. The speed at which you're able to zip around town, the size of Townsville, and the overall feeling sets it apart from the pile of other games based on the series. The combat isn't amazing here, but I guess when looking back on the show, I remember most of the girls' combat just being them smashing the hell out of whoever they were fighting. I don't remember it being something like Batman, where there was a lot of nuance to the combat, so maybe the shitty combat is an inherent pitfall of basing something on the Powerpuff Girls. Overall, I don't think the Powerpuff Girls Relish Rampage is exactly a good game. There are a bunch of problems with this game and things that seriously affect your enjoyment. The combat is so dull, the missions are ridiculously repetitive, and most of all, the game is only like 2 hours long. However, Viz have enough here to keep this from being a bad game. The voice acting and humour is great, the feeling of flying around town is awesome, and there's no ridiculous game-breaking bugs. It's kinda sad that I have to say that, but after playing a game like Disaster Strikes, it's a blessing to get something that actually works as intended. I actually think the reviews it received are a little harsh. Like the IGN review for example. This game isn't a masterpiece, but there's no way you can tell me this is a 3.8. Hell, if this is a 3.8, I desperately want to know what they rate the rest of the garbage based on Cartoon Network franchises so far. In my opinion, this is by far the best Powerpuff Girls game, and quite frankly might be my favourite Cartoon Network game so far, potentially overtaking Dexter's Laboratory Robot Rampage. And that's my journey through all 7 Powerpuff Girls games. It's a real shame that we never truly got a game that reflected the quality of the show. You'd imagine it would be kind of easy to make a Powerpuff Girls game purely based on the premise, but as you can see, early 2000s developers really struggled. There have been some brighter moments for the girls in crossover games like Cartoon Network Racing or Punch Time Explosion, and they're rumoured to be playable characters in the upcoming multiverses. But as for a great standalone Powerpuff Girls game, it looks like that'll never happen. To make sure you don't miss any of my upcoming reviews, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And to stay up to date with everything that's happening with the channel, jump over to Twitter and give me a follow.